Well, good morning on this lovely autumn day. It's really a beautiful day, and it's good to have you here. As I mentioned, today's service has been an offering from two colleagues of mine who were at one point serving in the DC area. And I want to thank Reverend Peggy Clark and Reverend Christian Smith for providing this inspiration. I think it's really important that we recognize that there is power that exists within each one of us and within this faith tradition of ours. And this sermon that's presented today, the words I'm going to share in just a moment, are the creation of Reverend Clark. And this is what she has to say. TikTok might say men think about the Roman Empire daily, but it's the American Empire that has my attention. Mirroring the innocence of the mid and late 20th century, I grew up believing that the United States is the best nation that has ever existed. That opinion came to me from my white immigrant family, gratefully appreciating the opportunities and the freedom of economic prosperity that they found here. But over time, our democracy has begun to fade, and whether or not children are told this is the best nation in the history of nations doesn't alter our current downward trajectory. You know, as much as we'd like to say that we've been a democracy since 1776, or maybe from the ratification of the Constitution in 1788, we've mostly been a democracy in progress until the full realization with our passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. With the codification of the inclusion at the ballot booth, the United States of America became worthy of the admiration of democracies, both realized and struggling around the world. Our system of government, standing on a strong foundation of law, had the full support of our nation's people and our institutions, creating what we thought was an unbreakable network ensuing equal access to our founding promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as we approach the 60th anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act, most Americans are aware that our democracy is having some challenges. There are many key markers that support this suspicion, including our decline on the Polity Index that moved us below the threshold of full democracy in recent history. President Biden warned us just a few weeks ago that democracy is at risk, that the threat to our institutions and our Constitution is serious. He noted extremism and increasingly disturbing threats of violence on our leaders. Of course, we don't need scholars or even the president to tell us what we can see and hear for ourselves. Strong, healthy democracies require what we call civil society. Civil society consists of all of the voluntary organizations where people gather, autonomous from the state. These groups might have some state support, funding, or interaction, but they are independent of state controls, and they have their own agendas and goals. They're concerned with public ends, but they aren't seeking state power. They exist for many reasons, but one is to influence law, culture, and the ways that we live together. They're part of a larger piece of community living, valuing pluralism, inclusion, and a wide range of life experience and thought. The organizations that populate civil society include educators, and I know we have educators in this room, those who advocate for curriculum development to train the next generation of thinkers and leaders. It includes climate activists who push against corporate influence, and librarians, and I know we have a number of librarians here, who ensure that access to a diversity of ideas and workers who leverage their collective power to ensure fair wages and protections. Civil society includes museums that preserve our history, dance companies that celebrate self-expression, and community theaters where new philosophies are given language and an audience. Cults are not a part of civil society because they want to separate people from the mainstream. And yoga classes don't generally qualify because they have no interest in influencing public life. Churches, on the other hand, do. So do all of our UU congregations like the Ministry of Earth, State Action Networks, and the UUSJ, the UU Social Justice Team. That is a group that influences and is our voice on the Hill. All of these institutions are a part of the fabric of civil society, without which we don't have an authentic democracy. Scholars tell us that democracies don't collapse because of a single influential person. They collapse because the people who should know better align themselves with stronger, more dangerous personalities. They themselves aren't fascists, communists, or extremists. They're just too weakly committed to democracy and are ultimately opportunists who say what they think they need to say to get or keep power. Civil society is one of the key levers to keep those elements of our society in check. Groups that are themselves run democratically, giving everyone the experience of having a voice and a vote, with deep membership rosters of concerned and engaged citizens, or public forums for open discussion, become a counterbalance to self-serving individuals. These kinds of organizations create occasions for influence and can reward opportunists with the popularity or power they seek without requiring them to compromise their commitment to democratic systems. Totalitarian nations do not have a civil society. The more civil society in a country, the more democratic it can be. There aren't that many fully totalitarian nations, but we can see those systems in operation in North Korea. China used to be a more complete totalitarian system, but civil society's been growing there. Nations like Russia want to increase governmental control. They shut down parts of civil society, as does every autocrat seeking to consolidate his or her power. We've seen those elements at operation in our country. So voluntary organizations are a crucial part of any healthy, transparent, and legitimate democratic system. We can determine the vitality of a democracy by the integration of these groups in the fabric of the nation. Faith-based organizations are historically some of the most difficult to terminate because they are often seen as the moral centers of the community. Shutting them down forces the government to admit a lack of concern with morality, an act most citizens find alarming. Instead, many authoritarian regimes work to befriend religious institutions, seeking to align religious power centers with their own. And we see that happening here in the United States. Evangelical churches have become supporters of some of the more dangerous factions in our current system. This makes our own position as a liberal religious denomination all the more necessary in our current political climate. We continue to have the moral authority to counter the current trajectory and can stand against the wave of conservative religious alignment with the radical right-wing political movement. Our existence, our internal health and strength is an essential part of what can turn the tide of democratic legitimacy. It is our witness to pluralism, an embrace of science as a source of truth, our own democratic structures, our collective voice for choice, for education, for inclusion, and our training of a new leadership class that demonstrates the need for our witness and the centrality of our voice as a part of civil society right now at this moment in history. So what we do here, however many people show up on a Sunday morning, is really important. Keeping these small or larger congregations flourishing and committed to examining our own personal response to life, but collectively what we can do in the larger community is really important. All of this does come at a time that religion is on a steep decline in American culture. Across the country, Unitarian Universalist churches have seen a dramatic reduction in membership. We know COVID certainly played a role in that. We've lost 18,000 children from our RE programs over the last 10 years. We've lost 100,000 members over the last 50. In 2020, the average size of a UU congregation was half the size as 20 years earlier. And I'll say 2020 probably is not a fair marker due to COVID, nonetheless. And we know that we are not alone in this free fall. As we decline in national influence, so does American democracy. Peggy says, I don't think that these things are unrelated. Just as people are turning away from institutional religion, the demons of authoritarianism are gaining ground. When the moral centers lose influence and can no longer claim to be our collective conscience, it's easier for alternatives to take root. Our voices get weaker and are harder to hear. But let's not pretend that we do not have a voice, that we are inaudible. There are close to 200,000 people in UU churches. We have not given up our space at the table, nor our moral authority, even if the tide of totalitarianism hopes to wash us over. This is evidenced at the very least by our decision to bring this service to our own congregations today, as so many other UU congregations are doing. Power Sunday, and this is being framed as Power Sunday, comes from UUs for Social Justice. This organization was founded originally by a circle of UU churches in the Washington, D.C. area who wanted to give their geographic location some oomph and influence federal conversations. About 2 years ago, this organization, UUs for Social Justice, broke out of that model and opened it up to UUs across the country so there would be a larger collective voice. It's a small organization, and it doesn't have any full-time staff, but with the help of their executive director, they do have an outsized influence in federal policy conversations. This service today is designed to get the word out about both our UU potential as a faith community through whatever you all are doing on the ground and through the work of organizations like UUs for Social Justice. It's also today is designed to remind us that we are a very important part of civil society, and it's very much needed in these fragile times as democracy is getting a workout. In future years, it's the hope that Power Sunday will include an opportunity for advocacy so that we as UUs can continue to leverage our collective power. Scholars might tell us that American democracy is deconsolidating, but it is far from its collapse. Even through significant challenges, the system is holding, and we see that in the news every day. It's almost, sometimes it's exhausting. Most of the time it's exhausting to watch the news, but it's like a game of chess. This happens and then there's a checkmate. And I've become this witness in watching it because I don't know what's going to happen next, but I do see that these systems continue to hold strong. With the kickoff of Power Sunday, UU congregations can step into our moral authority in partnership with one another and other liberal religious members of civil society to hold strong against the tide of authoritarianism. Through our connection with UUSJ, the building of our collective power on the Hill, and as a partner with other denominations also holding back the waters of authoritarianism, Unitarian Universalisms and Universalists play a key role in helping to keep this democracy strong. And as I said, today in churches around the country, we are raising our shared consciousness, holding up our critical place in the democratic fabric of our nation, turning our collective voice and reminding Unitarian Universalists that we are necessary, that we are not alone, and that in this fragile moment of American history, we are powerful. And that's a nice, this is our power reminder. On your order of service at the bottom, there are 4 different organizations that are listed there. I encourage you, one is the UU Social Justice organization, one is the Pennsylvania organization, there's Side with Love, there's 4. So check out those websites, become involved, recognize that you have a role to play. We do have support. We are not alone. And I really encourage you to, we come up with an election in a couple of weeks. It's not the big one, but it's important that we get out there and show up, because it's a lot of what, as important as the annual, every 4-year election is, it's these interim elections that are really important, because that's where school board officials are being elected. That's where local county governments are being elected. That's where we get to have a real impact in our communities. So if you haven't registered to vote yet, I believe it's open until the 23rd of this month. So the message that this is really ringing with me is that we are powerful. Each and every one of us have a role to play, and we need to remember that, and when we join together, that's only multiplied.